Welcome back to Neil Oliver Live. My next guest this evening is Sebastian Gorka, former advisor to Donald Trump. He joins me now to discuss the surge in border crossings that's creating so much political upheaval in the US. Seb, Gorka, thanks. So good to see you again.
Good to see you. It's been a while. Happy New Year, Neil.
Happy New Year to you. We were just talking to Glenn Beck, and he was obviously very fearful about the potential in Texas specifically. 8 million, illegals in 3 years. 60% of the women and children who are coming across being raped en route. You've spoken about all of this. How do you take this story forward after what Glenn Beck had to say?
Look, it's very serious. I look at it a little less hyperbolically than Glenn does, but this is a constitutional crisis, and beyond that, this is a national security threat. Why? Well, let's go back to 7/7 or to 9/11 and remind ourselves just what a handful of individuals can do. The greatest terror attack in the modern age was 19 men with, box cutter knives and CS gas spray that killed 3,000 people in 102 minutes. That's 19 men. As you say, there are 8 million who have crossed the borders illegally in the last 3 years. That we know of. I spoke to Stephen Miller, my former White House colleague, just last week on my radio show on America First, and I said, okay, 8 million that we know of, how many illegals are there in the country? And he's the expert, and he said 40 million. Now, if you look at the numbers, just the raw numbers, it's 10,000 plus a day crossing the border illegally with no background checks. If you're a bad guy, if you're Al-Qaeda, if you're ISIS, if you're Al-Nusra, if you're Hamas, what are you going to do if you know American borders are empty? You're going to be secreting your operatives into those hordes of illegal immigrants. And as a result, we could be on the cusp of something very, very bad occurring in America. And that's why the governor of Texas said, I'm sorry, I am responsible for the people of my state. We are a republic of states. Texas was its independent owner nation back in the 19th century. So he's taking action. And God bless Governor Abbott, because Biden is preventing the securing of the border.
Seb, what would your old boss do what would he do tomorrow if he was in charge tonight?
Well, I get asked this question a lot, like, what would President Trump do with regards to Ukraine and the war in the Middle East and the rising China? And I just laugh. When anybody asks me, a deep, guttural belly laugh, because I tell them it wouldn't have happened. We had 4 years of peace under my old boss, no new wars. And then we are replaced by this senile old git in the White House. We have the invasion of Ukraine. We have the disastrous surrender of Afghanistan. We have the slaughter of the innocents in Israel, the largest massacre of Jews since the Shoah, since the Holocaust. What would the president do? Well, it wouldn't have happened. But what are we going to do if, God willing, everyone does their part and President Trump is reelected? Like flicking a switch, Neil, we will revert to everything we did on day one of the Trump administration, secure the border as we did back then, and then deport them all. As my good friend Mark Morgan, the former commissioner of Customs and Border Protection under President Trump, I asked him on the show recently, how are we going to get rid of all these illegals who broke the law to come here? He says we're going to deport them one by one, and that's what has to happen, Neil.
Seb, I heard you address the Oxford Union, and I heard you point out the existence of a connective tissue between George Washington all the way through to Obama. And that connective tissue was that they were all congressmen, senators or generals, elites. Yeah. And that what America was crying out for and chose in 2016 was somebody who was not of that elite. How did the ideologues get so far away from 70-odd million or more American citizens?
Well, look, our founding fathers saw leadership as a civil and civic duty, but would be horrified by the idea of a professional political class, the likes of which we have today. We have members of the Congress and Senate today who've been there for 40 plus years. That's horrific. Even George Washington, when he was offered a king-like position after his term in office as president, said, no, I'm going back to my farm to be an American citizen. So the irony of it all, as an immigrant to this nation, that I have to remind my fellow Americans who were born here, they did something incredibly special in 2016, as special as Brexit. For the first time in our history, the people gave, the two-fingered salute to the elite and said, we don't want a president who's a former congressman, senator, or governor, or retired general. And they picked this building magnate, this guy from Queens, who'd never run for any office, including county dog catcher, and he won the first time. 64 million people said, enough with the elite. It's like the 17.5 million who said, enough with the communism of Brussels, and voted for British independence. So this is the recrudescence, the rebirth of national sovereignty. But we need President Trump back in the Oval so we can seal our borders to begin with.
Bear with me, Seb. Frank Furedi, do you think the world, in a way, is still reeling from 2016, when Trump was elected to the White House and Britain voted to leave the European Union?
Well, at the meeting at Davos, at the World Economic Forum, that's all they talked about. All they talked about was the threat that was represented by these two magnificent events. And I think they still haven't learned to deal with it. And now, with populist movements on the rise everywhere in Europe, they really are worried that somehow their way of life is going to be challenged in a way that is far more reaching than what happened in 2016.
And lastly, while I still have you, Seb, what do the Democrats do? Do you see Biden running, or do you see a last-minute change of plan?
Well, first, I'm honored to be on the same platform. Thank you, Neil, with Professor Furedi. My parents escaped Hungary in 1956. My father was a prisoner in a communist prison camp there. So God bless you, sir. He can't run. I mean, if the election were today, the polls are very clear. President Trump would romp home with a 49 or 50 state victory. He's crushing the incumbent right now, 10 months before the election. He's getting more senile, more incompetent. So President Trump, that's why he's facing all these legal battles. That's why Democrats are trying to illegally remove his name from the voting ballots. I mean, this is the sheer fascism of today's Democrat Party. So no, if they were rational, and of course they're not rational, they'd replace him at the convention. The only way to really get rid of an incumbent president is some kind of shenanigans with superdelegates, as they did with Bernie Sanders in favor of Hillary Clinton. So some kind of shenanigans at the Democrat convention, or he'll be convinced to say, oh, I'm too sick, or I want to be with my grandkids, although he disowns the grandchild from Hunter Biden with that stripper, which is a little bit piquant. And then I expect they're going to parachute in, or attempt to parachute in, this slick, big hairdo, grinning white teeth governor of California, Gavin Newsom. I think Gavin Newsom is, as we say here, the Hail Mary pass for the Democrats. But it's going to be shenanigans at the convention if it does happen.
I suggested in what I said at the top of the show here that it's futile for our government to be pushing notions of a citizen army, and because love of country has been so eroded in the young. And I wonder, you've suggested that what Trump stood for in 2016 and presumably would stand for again is just a kind of simple love of country that his opposition have forgotten.
Yeah, let me look. Thank you for mentioning my speech at the Oxford Union. I dwelt on this. It's gone viral, more than 1 million views in 5 days. It's on my Twitter feed. Please check Seb Gorka on Twitter for a longer explication. But I've said this on my radio show now for about 3 years. The division between the population here, and I think the same goes for the UK, the land of my birth, isn't right or left or Republican or Democrat or Labour, Vice, Conservative. It's one question alone, Neil, and you know this, you write about this in your books. It's whether you love the country or whether you hate it. If you deem your country and Western civilization to be the bane of the world, white supremacist, neo-colonialist, patriarchy, cisgender, all that neo-Marxist garbage, if you hate that country, you will be of the left today. If you love it, if you believe in Judeo-Christian civilization, in the bulldog spirit, the Churchillian spirit of the UK, if you love America as President Trump does, you will be of the right. You will be what is derisively called a populist today. But the dividing line is, do you love your country or do you hate your country? It really is that simple.
Going to leave that question hanging there, Seb. Thank you so much. So good to see you again. Thanks for now.